Welcome to Disciple Dojo. In this episode, we are going to sit down and talk with Caleb Campbell. Caleb's the author of Disarming Leviathan, Loving Your Christian Nationalist Neighbor. Now, this topic, Christian nationalism, it's in the news, in the media cycle. It is a hot button issue. And immediately when people hear the phrase Christian nationalist, they start filling in the blanks with the worst caricature of whatever they think about Christian nationalism, whether they're pro, whether they're anti. And so in this discussion, Caleb and I talk about what it is, what it's not, and more than important than anything, what is the attitude of Jesus when even approaching the issue of Christian nationalism? So as you're watching, if you're like, oh, this is a helpful conversation, I'm actually appreciating this, we would love for you at some point, just tap the little subscribe button. That's a great way to show your appreciation. And it helps get Disciple Dojo content in front of more people's eyes here on YouTube. And also the name Disciple Dojo. What do you do in a dojo? You spar. You strive against another person, not as your enemy, but as a training partner, someone who's trying to make you better. And that's the kind of attitude that I strive to cultivate here at Disciple Dojo when it comes to theological disagreement. So I know some viewers are going to watch this and have strong disagreement with some of the things they hear on both sides. And that's okay. I would invite you in the comment section below. If you feel like sharing a comment, if you want to engage, if you want to interact, if you want to challenge, to push back, all of that stuff is completely welcome. Just do it as a training partner, not as an enemy. Be respectful, talk to people, myself included, with the same tone and degree of respect that you would want them to talk to you. Golden rule, people. Let's follow that. Okay, let's talk about Christian nationalism with Caleb Campbell. Dojo viewers, we are here with Caleb Campbell, author of Disarming Leviathan, Loving Your Christian Nationalist Neighbor. Just the title alone, some of you, I'm sure, have already been like, ugh, tune out. So, Caleb, first of all, tell them before we jump into why they should not tune out. And folks, you really shouldn't. Just tell them who you are real quick. Introduce yourself. You and I, we don't know each other. We just met literally like 20 seconds ago, face to face. So who are you? Where are you? And what do you do?
So my name is Caleb Campbell, and I serve as lead pastor at Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona. I've served as a pastor for almost 20 years now, and as the lead pastor for 10, I think, coming up this year will be 10 years. Love Phoenix, born and raised. This is my community. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book was because I saw inside my evangelical community here, which is theologically evangelical, generally speaking, politically conservative or libertarian, centrist-ish. That's all in the water. And I just watched this wave of American Christian nationalism wash over so many churches here, my own community, my family. And so my heart is just to help people understand what American Christian nationalism is as it's currently expressed, and then how we can engage folks that have given themselves over to it.
Yeah. Well, it comes across beautifully in the book. You do a great job, especially at the beginning. You kind of front load your, like, why this matters to you. And the big thing is you don't see, and you urge readers not to see Christian nationalists around them in their community as the enemies. It's a very anti-polemic book, even while you're still saying things that a lot of people would be uncomfortable with. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start with, for viewers that, again, they're on the verge of tapping the skip button and first of all, let's just give us a working definition of this hot button term that's in the news right now, Christian nationalist. What is Christian nationalism? And then what is it not?
Sure.
People don't.
Great question. Yeah, so I view American Christian nationalism as it's currently expressed through a missiological lens, and I see it as three things at the same time. Number one, it's political ideology, namely that Christians should take government power to protect and propagate their way of being in the world. So that's classic nationalism. Glad to talk more about that. But Christian nationalism is answering the question of who gets to be in charge and for what purpose. It's also tribal identity. It's a way to refer to a people group, many of whom self-identify as Christian nationalists or other synonyms. And it's a way to describe my people. It's a tribal identity. There's insiders and outsiders. And so within American Christian nationalism, there are origin stories, hero stories, taboos, food, music, lingo, rhetoric. There's othering language. There's certain behavior that will have you excused from the communion if you engage in that behavior. And there's other forms of behavior that you'll be celebrated as someone who's valorous or worthy of leadership. And in that sense, it's like tribalism as you see it all around the world. And third, it is a spiritual idolatry. It is a form of empire worship and syncretism, the conflation of certain aspects of the American civic religion with certain aspects of Christianity, often in an evangelical form, but not only evangelicalism. So American Christian nationalism is three things at the same time. It is a political ideology, tribal identity, and spiritual idolatry. And in the lived experience of those who've given themselves over to it, the dials might be turned up differently. It might be more political ideology, less tribal identity, or for some, it's all tribal identity and no political ideology. And what it's not, American Christian nationalism is not a synonym for conservatism. Christian nationalism is, again, as a political ideology, has been practiced all around the world for a couple hundred years now. As the fall of empires happened over the last couple hundred years, we had the last round of empires by and large collapse after World War II. And so you have the rise over the last couple hundred years of this political entity, sometimes referred to as a nation state. And the question is, what we understood about Christendom, namely that there's quote unquote Christian empire, that the emperor has to be a Christian or whatever you might think. How do we talk about that same phenomenon in the context of nation states? And that's where Christian nationalism starts showing up in literature and historic analysis, political analysis. And it's sometimes conservative and sometimes progressive. It is simply about who gets to be in charge. It is not a series of postures towards policy and legislation. So it's not inherently conservative or liberal or progressive. It is just trying to figure out who gets to be in charge. So for instance, there are versions of Christian nationalism that we would call progressive in like modern America. So in the 1970s, there were advocates of something called Black Christian nationalism whose policies would today be considered on the left. And so it's not conservatism. In fact, there are many people who are politically conservative who have huge concerns about Christian nationalism because it seems to be expressed today as more authoritarianism, populism, giving more power to the federal government, which is generally speaking the opposite of most conservative views.
Right.
And so it's not conservatism. I live in the land of Barry Goldwater and John McCain. There is a statue of Barry Goldwater about 10 miles down the road from where I'm currently sitting. John McCain represented me for almost my entire life. This ain't conservatism.
Right.
It's also not a synonym for Christians engaging in politics. That's not Christian nationalism. So I get that there's some people who say, well, if you're trying to bring your Christianness into the political sphere, that's Christian nationalism. And that's a misapplication of the term. Christians should be involved, in my opinion, in public life, in civic life. I think that the concept of a public servant is a really great place to start when we think about like Philippians chapter 2 or Jesus' model of leadership. And I think that that's for the common good. So I'm all for Christians bringing their Christianness or their Christian conviction or whatever you want to say into the public sphere. Again, Christian nationalism in America as expressed today is the argument that only Christians should take government power to protect and propagate our way of being. So at its root, it's not really about politics or which way we're going to go, conservative or progressive. It's more about who gets to be in charge and what they're going to do with that power.
Yeah, that's a misunderstanding that I think a lot of people, even those who would be considered Christian nationalists but don't know it, or whose views would align with it, I think a lot of them have that misunderstanding. Like somebody on my Facebook feed posted something that was critiquing the new Apostolic Reformation, NAR theology and Seven Mountains and that stuff. And they said, this is heresy. This is dangerous. This is Trojan horse or whatever. This is not good. This is bad. And somebody responded and they said, so are you saying Christians shouldn't have podcasts or serve in office or shouldn't affect culture? So how do you tease that out a little bit? What is there, even if it's not a neat dividing line, how do you know when you're veering away from being salt and light as a Christian to what you would consider, and we'll talk about in a minute, Leviathan, the beastly Babylon, imagery? How do you know when you're heading in that direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. One way, and let me say, the complexities of power, no matter where we find ourselves, are so manifold that we need a daily wisdom from the living God to discern which of these paths in front of me is the way of Jesus and which is the way of the kingdoms of this world. Like, I'm an evangelical pastor. I have a ton of power, and I find it difficult every day to know, okay, Lord, what is the wisest, most loving decision I can make based on the information I have at the time? And so this is not easy. I mean, part of scripture as wisdom literature is that value is we're immersed in scripture. We're relying on the Spirit. We're engaging in scripture in a diverse community of fellow believers, and we're becoming wise, right? Ephesians 3 and 4, we're being shaped into a mature Christ likeness. And that means that there are manifold decisions every day that I need to think through about what's the wise path and what's the broken path. So I'm going to give some examples, but it's not at all exhaustive. One way to discern, I think, that can be helpful in discerning, is this path of the Spirit of the living God or of the spirit of the age, is to look at the lists in Galatians and the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh. Is this path, is this movement, is this group exhibiting fruit of the Spirit or works of the flesh? And that's, at least, if I'm not seeing the fruit of the Spirit, and especially if I am seeing the works of the flesh, it's at least a red flag to be like, maybe just because they're talking God talk doesn't mean, that doesn't mean that they're walking God walk. And if they're not walking God walk, then red flag, right? I mean, Jesus told us that there would be wolves in sheep's clothing, and that one of the ways we can discern is look at the fruit, look at the fruit of their lifestyle. And so as I'm just kind of listening to leaders and entrusting my heart and my mind into the discipleship of others, I want to pay attention to their fruit. What's the fruit of their teaching, their example, their posture, their rhetoric? Another, I think, red flag would be, is this more like Machiavelli or the Messiah? So Jesus had a ton of power, like Philippians chapter 2, but he did not grasp onto it for his own self, but rather took on the form of a servant and gave and did it in service of others, including people who were nothing like him, who he didn't agree with. I mean, look at who was always at Jesus' table. And so with whatever power I have, am I being like Jesus with that power for the sake of others, especially those who scripture consistently reminds us to fix our eyes upon? The quartet of the vulnerable, widow, poor, immigrant, orphan. Jesus talks about, if you've done so unto the least of these, you've done so unto me. And that's a helpful corrective of, is this power for my benefit and the benefit of my homies? Or is this power being used for the benefit of those who Jesus or Yahweh in Hebrew scripture most closely has their eye upon? And the Machiavellian means, and this is what I mean, Machiavelli is often attributed to being the one who said that the ends justify the means. Right. So there's this desired end. We should have a godly country. We should have justice and righteousness in all of our leadership. Great. Love it. On board. And so what we're going to do is we're going to lie, cheat, and steal. We're going to use the methods of the kingdoms of this world to try to obtain a good end. We've got to fight fire with fire. And that's the fatal flaw in American Christian nationalism, is it is falling for the temptation of the tempter in the desert. When Jesus was tempted in the desert, the Spirit drove him out to the wilderness for 40 days, and he's tempted with good things that are already promised to him. The temptation was not the good end. It was the means by which he would obtain those ends. Remember, like, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. It's already Jesus's. I'll give you, physical safety, bread. And you can command angels. These are already things given to him, but it's given to him through a cruciform way of being in the world. And yet the temptation is we're going to do it the way of the tempter or Machiavelli or, the ends justify the means. And so what I'm very concerned about with American Christian purveyors of American Christian nationalism is they're offering good ends that seem really great. Let's have a godly, tax code. Cool. I want a godly tax code. And what we're going to do is we're going to behave like the kingdoms of this world to get it. And that is another red flag of like, man, that way of being in the world to try to obtain power to get a good thing done is the temptation of Christians since, I don't know, Constantine, that when I am financially or politically benefited by being a Christian, things start getting funny. They start getting wonky real quick because maybe I'm using my Christianness to try to get some more worldly power. And that temptation can be so blinding. Jesus talked about greed as a problem of the eye. You can't see it. And I think that this form of power is also blinding because it sounds really good. Yeah. But at its heart, it's deceptively corrupt.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like, and this will segue into what I want to ask you first, it sounds like patriotism to a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, how many websites and news outlets have patriot in the title that when you actually look at them, this is just rank nationalism. You have a quote. Let me read a quote for viewers on page 33. You said, and I'll have you unpack this a little bit. You said, a patriot loves their country, celebrates its virtues, practices its customs, and out of love, critiques its failures and repents of its sins when called for. Patriotism in America emphasizes bringing together people around common beliefs. Nationalism, by contrast, emphasizes excluding those they view as outsiders. Great quote. We have a video here. I think I sent it to you where Captain America behind me, our superhero seminary faculty, talks about the difference between patriotism and nationalism.
Yeah.
How can you embrace patriotism? Like, what are some ways either you personally or your church or others can embrace patriotism in the way that people like C.S. Lewis talked about, where it genuinely is a virtue without it turning into nationalism, which is an idolatry?
Like being frugal and being successful in your business ventures can be really healthy, but the line between that and greed can sometimes be confusing. So too, having a healthy love for my people can sometimes drift into a supremacizing of my people. So what I would say would be a way to discern the difference is I love my family, the Campbell family, like my immediate family. And I love your family. I don't really know your family.
They're lovable.
I love them. Yeah, sure. Love them. But I think it's fair to say I love my family more than I love your family. Great. If I say, therefore, my family is the supreme example of human family relationships, and actually we should get more power and diminish or push away or dehumanize the Smith family. Now we've definitively crossed into the threshold of the supremacization of my people over your own. And so that's one threshold that gets crossed is if my love for my people, my customs, my music, when I travel overseas, after a week or two, I start feeling like physiologically homesick.
Right.
I want to, and a lot of it is, because I love where I'm from. I love my people. I love our food. I love the way we celebrate. And when I'm in foreign environments, it takes a lot of work. Like I'm trying to figure, am I behaving in a proper way? Like I'm just not really at rest. And so I love my home. But the minute I say, therefore my home is like empirically better and should dominate over, we've lost the plot. And when my love for country or people or place, whatever it might be, my patriotism, when I'm unable to criticize my people's failures, of which I am an active participant, we may be drifting into a form of idolatry. One of the ways that you could tell that something might be an idol is that you can't ask it critical questions. So Tim Keller, who was a pastor in New York City, loved Tim Keller. And one of the things that he popularized was this idea that an idol is a good thing that's made into an ultimate thing. That if it's removed from you, you don't just feel sad, you feel like you can't go on anymore. It becomes the very center of your being. And one of the ways that you can tell is that you can't ask it critical questions. This could be my money. You can't look at my money. I mean, ask to see one of your accountability buddies' bank accounts, and they're gonna be like, "No way, hide it from me."
Right.
One of the ways you could discern if sex is an idol is you can't ask critical questions about sex life. And one of the ways to discern if your love of your people is becoming an idol is you can't criticize it, and you can't suffer other people criticizing it.
Right.
That is a telltale sign that this might have become a love that has become an ultimate love. And that ultimate love, that spot of ultimate love, is ultimately reserved for Jesus. And part of the temptation when I have an idol and I'm a follower of Jesus is to draw crosses on the idol to justify my idolatry. My greed is okay because look at how I'm using it.
Right.
It's like I'm using it for Christian things. I put the coins in the Salvation Army bucket every Christmas, so that therefore justifies me abusing the poor in my wages. I watch people tie themselves into knots to justify aberrant behavior by connecting it to what they think is Christian things. And I think these are just classic examples. And Christian nationalism does that. It takes politics, makes it into an idol of nationalism, but then justifies it by putting crosses everywhere.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's not a conservative liberal thing because a lot of liberation theology did the same thing. It would take the goal of liberation and helping the oppressed, which is a great goal, and it would turn that into that is the core of the gospel. And so liberal, conservative, we are idol making factories. I remember another example was during the Occupy Wall Street movement a couple of years back. People would portray Jesus as their favorite, the Occupy folks' favorite passage to quote was Jesus flipping the money changers' tables. And he became, he gave out free health care. He was a socialist. He flipped the tables of the rich. And it slowly turned Jesus into this left-wing figure. And then, of course, Christian nationalists on the right have done the same thing, just with their particular causes. And the irony is, I think both sides would in theory say, yes, we should criticize our own country, but not over the things that they think that they've made into sacred cows.
That's right.
And so you had another quote, you said, this was great, it was on page 144. You said, while promoters of American Christian nationalism would balk at calls to corporate confession of institutionalized racism, chattel slavery, or manifest destiny, they frequently call for corporate confession for sexual licentiousness, abortion, and godlessness in general. And I would say the converse is true as well. I would say, the progressive Christians, like the bishop that gave the infamous or famous, depending on which view you are, speech sermon at the prayer service, and Trump was there. It's like speaking truth to power, but only speaking certain truths to power. Because if that were, if it were the topic were abortion on demand, sexual fidelity and that kind of stuff, like it would be a very different, like, well, that's, you're starting to push your views on somebody and you can't do that.
I love a prophet when they're yelling at the people I don't like.
Exactly. A lot of amens.
I think American evangelicals, one of our failures has been is we keep excommunicating our prophets instead of giving them a listen. I mean, I can think of, half a dozen to a dozen scholars, authors who continue to say, I'm a Orthodox evangelical, but I brought up issue, whatever it might be.
Right.
And I got kicked out.
Yep.
And often I think it's because of the desire to preserve institutions over the desire for righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
That somehow if we publicly confess that somehow the institution is under threat or the church is under threat. I don't know how many times I hear the greatest threat to the church is, them. If I understand the scriptures, there really isn't a threat to the church. There is a threat to the fidelity of the witness of the church.
Right.
And the greatest threat to the fidelity of the witness of the church, if I understand scripture, is me. I grow so weary of the elevation of the prophetic word only pointed at people I already don't like. And really the gift of the prophetic word, whether it come from scripture, from brothers and sisters, is that I might become more like Jesus. And I'm just grieved that we're so good at throwing prophetic grenades at people we want to dismiss and no longer fellowship with, and rob ourselves of the gift of becoming more like Jesus together.
Jesus and the Old Testament prophets alike were never afraid to criticize their own, to call out their own, their whoever they were most identified with. And even if it meant the implications would benefit like the other side, like to call out some of the things Jesus called out with. People might go, well, Jesus, hold on now. These are still our people, and Rome is the enemy. Rome's the bad guy, right? So if you're talking nice with a centurion, I mean, think about the optics of that, Jesus, when he is oppressing our people.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, yeah, I'm going to do it anyway. And the Samaritans, like, hold on, Jesus, these are legitimately enemies of us, and they want to, they think we're an abomination, that we have completely left the God of Israel, and we think the same about them. And just crossing the lines. I think the calling out of our own always it's the quickest way to reveal the hypocrisy that we hold on to, that we all do at times. I mean, to me, that's one of the most constant things to be on guard against is hypocrisy. Yeah. Because it's so easy to do and it's so easy to justify.
Yeah. And in Hebrew scripture, to my understanding, this is fascinating to me, that a people, namely Israel, kept hypercritical literature about their own selves. Like, it's not like it's like the worst version of their own national history that you could imagine. It's like it's just like all these failures and God's providence through that. And that's so striking to me that, and I'm just speaking as an American evangelical, that we've just lost that capacity. And instead we want to like paint everything with a positive brush, as if people can't see the rank hypocrisy. It's like people can see. I think we're trying to seduce ourselves into thinking that the kingdom's already here and we did it. And
it's the more I think the more familiar, and this may be why it's never bothered me when people criticize things about America. Because like I love America. What you said about traveling and coming home, I couldn't agree more. Like there's just, you feel I'm at home. You know, like for
Yeah.
you, it's Arizona and the desert and Phoenix. And for me, it's back in the South. You know, I did seminary up north in New England for a couple of years and then came back down south. I was like, yeah, this is, you
Yeah.
know, this is where I fit here better. But the reason that I've never even born and raised in Georgia, like our flag was the Confederate flag most of my entire life with the Georgia seal on the side.
Yeah.
From the earliest age, I've never had a problem saying, yeah, I'm glad the South lost the war. Like, because then my friends aren't my slaves. Like, because I grew up in a black neighborhood, these were my friends. And from an early age, I was like, yeah, that was not good.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't mean that I won't highlight and embrace all the things that are amazing about the South.
Sure.
It's just that, and I think to wrap all that up, I think it's because the older I get, the even less problem I have doing it is because of my familiarity with the Hebrew Bible. Because like you said, I mean, Jeremiah would not be in the Bible if you know, nationalists had been in charge of putting the canon together.
Yeah, right. That's good.
Jonah definitely wouldn't. You know, it's the
yeah.
most anti-nationalist book in all of Scripture. And
Yeah.
but the more comfortable we are with that, and the more we realize, oh, these are our stories, then I think we start to see, oh, God values people who can point the finger back at themselves and say, yeah, actually, this is really wrong. And I don't I mean, I guess I understand, but I can never relate to the mindset you talk about where it's like any criticism of saying something like structural institutional racism is a thing that still continues, you know, and people being like, oh, that's woke, that's progressive, that's blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't think it is at all. I think it's just recognizing reality.
Well, and even that phenomenon of belittling the topic or people group in order to dismiss it, I think it's intellectually dishonest.
What do you mean by that?
So let's take the example you gave. Institutionalized racism, systemic racism is a problem. It's baked into the system, and it's going to take more than the civil rights movement to fix it. Like it's going to take confession, repentance, et cetera, et cetera. And if I don't like that and I don't want to do the work, woke, you know, kind of dismiss it.
Right.
Or dehumanize the people who say it. Oh, you're just a woke. What that says is like, I don't need to listen to you because I'm dismissing you out of hand. And for me, it's intellectually dishonest because it's not actually engaging the arguments. Now, I get that there's a lot of like rhetoric and social media talk track, but you know, if you don't like that, get off of social media. But just because somebody, let me use it this way. So I'm married 20 years this year. And my wife and I have had this phenomenon where she thinks there's a problem, but I do not think that there's a problem.
Shocking.
I'm sure you've had a situation like this before, perhaps your listeners as well. And if I simply say there is no problem, we're not moving forward. Now, she may misunderstand the problem. She may be misdiagnosing a problem. But if I'm going to be in union, if I want to be in relationship with her, if she says there's a problem, there is a problem. And just because I can't see it or understand it does not negate my responsibility to step into a conversation, say, help me understand what's going on here, because I can't see what you see.
Right.
And I think especially for those of us who follow Jesus, who offers the tools required to engage in those kinds of conversations, confession, repentance, curiosity over suspicion, a faith that my identity is not bound up in me being right all the time. Reconciliation, restore peacemaking. Like, I think when we are engaging with conversations about social issues, what I would say are social justice issues, just because I can't see the problem doesn't mean there's no problem. And that doesn't mean that the other person who's raising the issue is crushing it with their analysis. But if they say there's a problem, there is a problem. Right. And it's going to take conversation and intellectual and spiritual integrity to find a way forward towards reconciliation.
Yeah. They could be wrong and you could be wrong. You both could be wrong. But the fact is, while it's unresolved, there is a problem.
There is a problem.
And that plays into the tendency of identity politics. And because identity politics is like, okay, my because of this person's identity, they are either right or they're wrong.
Yeah.
Not because of their arguments, not because of the nuance of the situation, but their identity. Like you talked about, you can just dismiss them. And to me, it's the most frustrating thing about current popular discourse. It's not new because, I mean, C.S. Lewis wrote about it. He called it Bulverism. And he had a great little thing where he just made up this guy named Ezekiel Bulver who would dismiss people because of something about their life. Oh, that explains why you believe such and such. But it really is, I think, the hardest thing in even talking about the subject of nationalism or even your book isn't about racial issues, but that certainly would fall into it. Even talking about those subjects, anything that's hot button in the social media culture, the Twitter sphere. I refuse to call it X, by the way. It's a dumb name. It will always be Twitter to me. But anything that's, those hashtag arguments, the danger is people hear what you're not saying. They don't hear what you're saying. They hear what you're not saying. And so like when I picked up your book, I immediately was like, okay, I know good, solid, faithful Christians are going to look at this and they're going to see this Christian nationalist not being portrayed as something that's a good thing. And they're going to immediately then they're going to start hearing all of the most left-wing things you can imagine. And that's what they're going to think. Oh, that's what this Caleb Campbell guy, there's probably, I don't even know. I don't know if you've looked. I haven't looked. I'm sure there's probably polemic sites that have issued blogs against you and, or are there? Do you know of any yet? Or
I've heard of some. Yeah.
I'd be surprised if there weren't, honestly. If Christianity Today gets nailed and Russell Moore and anybody else is taking heat, then I figure it's probably.
I'm just waiting for my scandal. You know what I mean? Like I'm just looking for it. I don't know where it is.
Let's get a shout out from Megan Basham or something. Somebody that can really stir the pot. But all of that for him. All of that to say, people we have this tendency to hear what others aren't saying. And you pulled a quote. There's a quote in your book, and you were quoting Miller, which said, Christian nationalism is, in effect, identity politics for tribal evangelicals.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant line. And I think it is 100% true. But I want to push back, though, again, on why is nationalism and Christian nationalism, why is it bad? Why do you liken it to literally the chaos monster, Leviathan, the ancient Near East opponent of all things divinely
orderly?
Good?
Yeah.
What are you saying? Everybody at that Turning Point USA conference that you went to, are they all worshiping the beast? Like, what's going on?
That's great questions. Yeah.
You answer while I sip my drink. And
please do. Yes. Enjoy yourself. Yeah. The fatal flaw of American Christian nationalism is the means by which you're trying to obtain kingdom promises. It is the argument that Christians should be reaching out their hand to take power. It's the same temptation that Peter gave into in the Garden of Gethsemane when the mob came to take Jesus, who he loved. In all earnestness, he loved Jesus, I believe. But he, in that moment when they were going to take Jesus, he couldn't think of anything more powerful than the way of the sword, which brings destruction or division or disintegration. And it's the wielding of worldly power in that way. Like the sword can only bring disintegration. It can only bring death. And as Jesus is reaching out for the cross, Peter reaches for a sword. And what Jesus shows in that moment, I think, is so instructive for us, is he tells Peter to put the sword away, and then he heals Malchus, who Peter had wounded for a good cause. Like think of it, he's trying to save Jesus. What better cause could there be? Right. And yet the means by which he's trying to accomplish that salvation is worldly means. What American Christian nationalism is arguing for is the use of sword power to beget or propagate the way of the cross. The other thing it does too, and this is where we have to get past rhetoric and into actual practice. we're not actually talking about Christian nationalism. We're talking about denominational nationalism. It's certain subset of Christian. Like, I've not heard anyone argue that Mennonites should be in charge of the Department of Defense.
Right.
We are not talking about more socialistic Christian arguments, of which there are. We're talking about a very acute way of being in Americana that's predominantly middle class, upper middle class, predominantly evangelical-ish, with very select views on certain culture war issues that does not at all encompass all of Christianity. And so what gets hitched to the Christian nationalist agenda is a bunch of other stuff that's just, frankly, Christians disagree about. And so it's flawed in that it's using kingdoms of this world power to try to advance quote unquote Christian means. It's what Constantine did. It's drawing a cross on the sword to justify its power. And you see examples of this for 1700 years of Christians using scripture, or, they're sanctifying evil. I think of American chattel slavery would be a key example of that. So American Christian nationalism is leveraging Christian iconography, lingo, rhetoric, desires, and it's hitching it with certain aspects of politics in America that don't belong together. The syncretism, I think, would be also a fatal flaw in American Christian nationalism and empire worship. So and again, this is an actual practice. You got to actually listen to what people are saying. I've been to many rallies and events. I was just at the National Prayer Breakfast, where I heard that America has a divine mandate from God. Okay, I got big theological questions about that. Like, as we're talking about geographic expansion of the country, it's manifest destiny is what I understand it to be.
Right.
And so that language that you hear, language like the United States Navy, which I think is great. I heard one pastor say at a Christian nationalist rally that the United States Navy is God's right hand of justice around the world. Like, that sounds really dangerous to me as a Christian, to conflate God's justice with human military power. So there's myriad heresies that are wrapped up in it. But at its root, it's not cruciform power, it's sword form power. And that would be the flaw. And then, is everyone at these rallies worshiping, I forget, the Leviathan or Babylon? Man, I don't know if half the time I'm not worshiping Babylon. As I read Revelation, that temptation to give into the ways of empire for my own safety, belonging, and purpose, when I self-analyze, they're myriad. They're all over me. So I don't know who's worshiping the dragon. I know I probably am half the time, with where I put my hope, where I put my trust. I got scared the other day about some global event, and the first thing I did was looked at my stock portfolio. I want to make sure that was all squared away.
Yeah.
Why did I do that? I do that, I think, because to some degree I'm enmeshed in Babylon, and I need constant repentance. So I can barely tell what's going on in my own heart half the time, much less other people. What I do know is the temptation of Babylon is ever present in myriad. And my heart for my community is that we would, all of us, turn back to the way of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, then, so you made a statement on page 28, and this is touching on what you just said. You said states claiming to have a special relationship with God are unbiblical, unsafe, and frequently introduce more evil into our world.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It was.
That's a spicy meatball.
Yeah, right. So, how is that the case? I mean, if being in special relationship with God, that should be. Aren't we all? And isn't that a good thing? And doesn't Jesus say, the Great Commission, go teach them to obey everything I have commanded you? So, is it really? Again, how is it really Babylon? Is it really Leviathan? And if not, like, why?
I would first notice that Egypt, Babylon, and Rome, so to use three biblical examples, all had some version of a divine king. So this idea that emperors, leaders of empire are claiming some level of divine authority, I mean, it's just all over the Bible. Like the idea of a secular state is
not
modern.
Yeah.
The problem, though, becomes when an empire claims the name of a god and then operates out of alignment with the character of that god. So the warrior gods of Babylon, Egypt, Rome, when they do warfare, when they do empire expansion, that makes perfect sense. It's right in alignment, right, with the character of their God. So is Yahweh like that? And moreover, I would say as a Christian, is Jesus like that? Is he like one who wants his name used for empire, imperial expansion? And is that what we're supposed to, like, why didn't he kill Pilate when he had the chance and tell us to set up a Christian empire? Like this for me, where in Jesus' teaching is this coming from? Because everything I see is that this is about using the power that you've been entrusted with in the service of others as a servant, foot washing, taking the last seat at the table, that the kingdom of God grows like a mustard seed, that you can't even see it, that you're so surprised that the outsider gets it before the insider, that it's the least of these that are the greatest among you. Paul talks about this as he's meditating on this in Ephesians when he says it's the lesser parts of the body that are actually worth greater honor. All of that upside down kingdomness flips empire power on its head. And how did Rome change? It was through people living the socioeconomically, ethnically diverse, transnational way of the king in local contexts where there was barbarian and Scythian, male, female, Greek, Jew, slave owner. And they're figuring out the Jesus way in service of each other and in service of their neighbors. Rodney Stark talks about how in, what's his book? I think it's The Rise of Christianity or The Triumph of Christianity, that one of the historical reasons why, in his assessment, Christianity grew so rapidly and transformed the Roman Empire was because Christians, when the plague would come in, they did not seek self-preservation, but rather sought to serve their neighbors, often taking the disease on themselves. In the service of their neighbors as they fed them soup and gave them water and things like that. So for me, it comes down to, if you're going to claim the name of Jesus in service of your empire, is that in alignment with the teaching and example of Jesus? It doesn't seem to be. It seems like it's some other God you should be using for this divine right that you seem to have. Because everything in the way of Jesus seems to speak to laying down power in the service of others, which gets really confusing when you live in a democratic republic and a liberal democracy where a lot of people are Christians and we're all trying to vote and figure it out. And that's where I think we've got to come back to the way of wisdom. But if our political actions are belittling, dehumanizing, combative, if it's marring the witness of the gospel, we've lost the plot.
Well, you have you give 6 attitudes that Christians can have towards politics. There's a section of the books, page 86 through 88, and you lay out kind of you riffing on the animal notion. You talk about you can either be an elephant and a donkey approach, an ostrich or giraffe approach, a dragon approach, and then the final approach is the lamb. So just whet viewers' appetites for what do you mean by that? Because the question everybody asks, the pushback I always get is, so are you saying Christians shouldn't vote their values? Are you saying that we should just be above it all, which some Christians do? They the Amish, they're just like, who cares? Walk us through those animals real quick and why you chose. Great. I mean, elephant and donkey, no brainer why you chose those animals, but the others in particular.
Yeah, and credit where credit's due. Most of this metaphor came from buddies of mine, Chris Gonzalez and Jim Mullins. I added the dragon on the end, but otherwise it's their bit, and I think I cite that in the book. So one posture towards politics is partisan. I'm just a member of a team, and whichever way that team goes, I'm going. I'm a Democrat, Republican. I'm an elephant or a donkey.
Right.
The other two are avoiders. So the the ostrich and the giraffe. So the ostrich buries their head in the sand. I don't want to talk about politics. It's a messy business. La, 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 la. I don't hear anything. That kind of posture. So they ignore it. They grow apathetic towards it. The giraffe is an avoider for a different reason, because they think they're above it all. Look at all these peons, down here engaging in all of their nonsense. I'm above it all. I can see what's real, and I'm quite wise, et cetera. Which leads to arrogance and hubris. And both the ostrich and the giraffe are disconnected from a key means of loving your neighbor, because politics is about people. I have a mentor in my life. She's in her 80s, African-American woman, Pentecostal, faithful woman of God, minister in our community. And she has said multiple times, what a privilege it would be to be disconnected from politics. But when they're sending your kids unjustly to prison and you got drugs on the streets, how can you not be engaged? Mm-hmm. And I think that's right, that if we care about people in our communities and politics impacts people in our communities, then we should care about politics. Mm-hmm. And so the fifth way is the dragon. And this is the culture warrior. This is a power for power's sake. It's not really about progressive or conservative. It's just give me more power. Right. So me and mine can, get ours, often, almost always at the expense of others. And it's that dragon-like culture warrior dominator. And then the way of the lamb, and this is riffing on the imagery of Jesus in the book of Revelation, that the lamb has power, but uses the power in service of others, especially the least of these. And so my encouragement to people would say things like, well, are you just telling me I shouldn't vote Christian values? Oh, by no means. One question I would have is, what do you mean by Christian values? Mm-hmm. Because what I'm hearing a lot of is people saying, well, I'm going to vote for the candidate that makes me the most money. Mm-hmm. So, hello, mammon, right? Like, here we are introduced to greed once again. Okay, right. So what are Christian values? Like, are Christian values, when we talk about civic engagement, about what me and mine get? Or is it about what at least the last and the lost are getting? How does this, one thing that would, I think, radically transform American Christian engagement in American politics is first filtering every policy decision through the lens of how does this impact the widow, the poor, the immigrant, the orphan? Mm. And then how does it impact me and mine? As opposed to, I'm voting for Christian values, which means propagating my own way of being in the world. Yeah. And then also, how does this vote impact our Christian witness? Because if it seems self-serving and combative and dehumanizing, are we closing people's ears to the gospel then? Because we've, gained part of the world and yet forfeited our witness?
Hmm. When you mentioned I love that approach of how does this benefit the widow, the orphan, the poor? I want to make sure, because I would add a category to that. It would also be the unborn. That is an issue for a lot of Christians, and that what they hear, again, hearing what you don't say, they care about the poor, the widow, the orphan, and they hear that as, and don't care about the unborn. And the whole pro-life abortion issue has become so partisanized. But it really should. I don't think it should be at all, because I have a video on here where I give, advice to my pro-choice friends who are like, if you want to understand why you're not reaching us, here's why. And talk about it being a human rights issue, because I look at the same thing that makes me run a refugee ministry here in Charlotte, which I do, a refugee jiu-jitsu outreach, is the same thing that makes me staunchly anti-elective abortion, because I see both as dehumanized, marginalized people that need protection by people who are more powerful. And somehow those two issues have gotten separated, so that if somebody hears me talk about passionately caring about the unborn, they immediately hear, oh, you don't care about the poor, the immigrant, the widow, and vice versa. You care about the poor and the immigrant? Oh, that means you don't. I'm going to protect the unborn. How about that? And
that's right.
Why not both? The famous meme, why not both?
Well, and that speaks to the elephant and donkey way of dividing issues.
Yes, 100%.
Well, I'm on the red team, so this is the red team issues. I'm on the blue team, so this is the blue team issues.
Mm-hmm.
And back to Tim Keller, he would talk about, like, if you're following the way of Jesus, you're going to run afoul of every political party at some point.
Yep.
And that concept of the quartet of the vulnerable, it takes wisdom to discern, like, who does that apply to today that we may not use that same category? So for instance, orphan, categorically, this would be a voiceless or powerless child.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you're arguing for fits right into that category. And you're right, in the age of hashtags, we got to articulate that better.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize if I gave any misimpression.
I don't think you did, but I know that people were going to hear it that way because of exactly what we're talking about.
It's those who have been disenfranchised, marginalized, or whose voices are not being heard, that those of us with the power of voice, that we not only speak for ourselves, but we also speak for them. And who fits in that category, I think just changes over time.
Right. So, yeah, absolutely. You, there's the tone of your book is what I think is would be surprising to a lot of people because it's very fashionable to be among, and I'm going to use the rhetoric among big evangelicalism, to be, and I think that's a dumb title, but it's funny to me because I'm always like,
Big Eva, is that?
Big Eva. Yeah. But it is fashionable among some to be anti-nationalist polemically, like seeing this as the enemy. And this is something I wrestle with. I wrestle with this because I'm evangelical. I'm not an ex-evangelical. I'm not ready to abandon the title, but there's so much culturally evangelicalism that I abhor. And so in my head, I'm like, well, somebody has to be speaking out. You know, we always ask, where were the evangelicals during the civil rights movement? You know, they weren't, even Christianity Today did a terrible job during the civil rights movement of embodying the gospel because they thought it was getting too political. And they've admitted that. That's something that CT itself has said. So the tension is, okay, how do I speak against what I do think is beastly among my people, but not alienate or unnecessarily alienate, not demonize them. Yeah. And that's hard for me. It is a constant temptation. And you don't do that in the book. Why do you like Christian nationalists? That's the question I would ask. And I ask that tongue in cheek, but
yeah, no, I get it. Yeah. I remember a friend of mine who's a pastor here. He asked me, why would you do this? Mm-hmm. They're me. I mean, this is my people. This is my community. I am not some reader of blogs who's forming opinions disconnected from a group of people. For me, this is about my people. This is my community. I'm right down the street from where there's a multi-million-dollar organization hosting monthly Christian nationalist rallies in the name of Christ. There's another infamous clergy down the road who just went full Christian nationalist and is blowing up their church and has done a ton of abuse and things like that. And I see in my own congregation that the carnage that is wreaking. And so it breaks my heart. It is my community. It's the mission field I've been called to. Mm. And I see in my community and those who I'm hoping to reach with the message of Jesus, my own self. So part of my testimony is before meeting Jesus, I was a neo-Nazi skinhead. Mm. And the reason why I was in that movement was not, I didn't sit down and read a genetics book one day and think, white people are the master race. I should go find some like-minded individuals to pal around with. Right. That's not how it worked. I was brought into a community that offered me safety, belonging, and purpose. The ideology came second. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so critical to recognize is that for many people, the community that they find themselves in are so shaping their ideology. It's not inverted. It's not first ideology, then community. It's the other way around because I'm holding onto this ideology to maintain my standing in the community. Mm. And you find it, and it's discipleship, right? Like discipleship is being brought into a community and then seeing the way of Jesus and then starting to take it in. It's just that the way of Jesus actually provides safety, belonging, and purpose, and these false ideologies provide a pale facsimile of it. Mm-hmm. And what drew me towards the way of Jesus was the hospitality, compassion, and long suffering of a couple who had me in their house once a week and fed me and listened to me rant and rave, and then would talk to me about Jesus in ways that were helpful for me to understand at my level. Mm-hmm. And I found the way of Jesus endearing. I wanted what they had because I wasn't getting what they had in my other communities. Mm-hmm. And I believe that folks who have given themselves over to American Christian Nationalists, the movement, are doing so in earnest. They think that, I think many of them, that it will provide safety, belonging, and purpose. But one of the critical components of being part of a safe community is knowing that you can say whatever's on the inside out loud without fear of expulsion. Mm-hmm. And if you're in Christian nationalist circles and you ask the wrong question, they will kick you out. You will be expelled from the communion. And that's not true safety or belonging.
What would some of the questions be? Like, what would an example of some type of questions?
Oh, great. Answer? Yeah. Critical question about the integrity of a leader. That particular leader or political figure seems to be doing evil things. Don't you agree? Oh, out. You've questioned the leader. Get out. Mm. You're a rhino, Republican in name only. Yeah. You're a super spy. You're never one of us. You've gone woke. Mm-hmm. Something as simple as I do think that there's systemic evil, racist systemic evil in America. Mm-hmm. Out you go.
Right.
And again, that inability to criticize, mm-hmm. I think, is there.
Do you get when you're able to sit down with somebody and unpack and nuance some of the things, like when you're able to have a conversation? Let's take systemic racial injustice.
Sure.
I've started using that term rather than systematic racism because sure. Whenever you use the word ism, people immediately are like, wait, I'm not a skinhead. I never joined neo-Nazi movement. I'm not a racist. And so I think when you can say, okay, systemic racial injustice, like something like that, it takes the focus off of the identity.
That's good.
But when you do sit down with someone, you're able to explain what you mean by, like to nuance and everything. What's helpful? What have you found helpful in your own pastoral ministry when talking to Christian nationalists? I'm not going to give away the ending, but at the end of the book, you have a lot of suggestions and here's what you should maybe say this and not this. And mm-hmm. So kind of what would be some overview, big picture guidelines for those kind of discussions?
Yeah. First, recognizing that the problem is not in the head, but in the heart. That I'll give you an example of why this matters. I don't know if you've ever had this phenomenon where you're talking with someone digitally in person and they have their facts wrong and you give them new facts and they don't change.
Yeah.
Like I gave you data. I gave you footnoted data and they're still like, nope, not changing. Because it's not about logicking ourselves to a position. It's about feeling ourselves to a position. That much of what's going on is felt, and then the logic comes after. Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Righteous Mind, gets after this, as well as some other
book. Yeah.
Adam Grant's done some work on it as well. And recognizing that the mind will not change until the heart feels safe. So if I approach someone and I think they're exhibiting or expressing bigoted behavior, fear-mongering, racism, whatever the thing is, if I say, you're a bigot, I've immediately postured myself as an enemy.
Yeah.
They will shield up. They're not going to listen to anything I have to say. Now, to be clear, there may be times, depending on the circumstance, where that's called for, right? Jesus did flip tables. I would just notice that he flipped tables once, maybe twice, depending on how you read John. But look at how many times he was setting tables. He's constantly inviting people with whom he fundamentally disagrees to his table. And he's modeling for them a better way and inviting them to enter into that restful way of being in the world. So I want to take my cues from Jesus, practicing hospitality, welcoming the person into my table or, into my life, working towards connection at the heart level, not just exchanging facts and opinions. I mean, if somebody is yelling at something, about something, we're having a heart conversation, right? Like when we're talking data and facts, there's a spreadsheet open, there's, talking normal tone of voice. If someone's animated, they're sweating, they're yelling, they're grinding their teeth. Those are expressions of the heart. Yeah. And so trying to connect heart to heart, doing things like this. Could you tell me a story about why that matters to you? So they say the thing about immigrants, whatever it is. Tell me why this issue is important to you. I could tell that you care a lot about safety in our community, honoring the good in them. I love that you care so much about safety for our community that you would give time and energy to this, which is honorable. I think they're wrong, this circumstance. We're thinking about, dehumanizing immigrants. I don't think that's right. But I do love that they care about the issue. Right. And that they're willing to give time to it. And I want to honor them for that. And I'm trying to avoid anything that's going to be a red flag. Statements like, well, Christianity is a global religion. We should just all have one world government. That would be terrifying. And I don't believe that, but something like that would immediately shut the conversation down. Right. Another red flag could be like, I was watching MSNBC, shield up and they're yeah. Or whatever, Fox News or whatever it might be. And then striving to connect at the value underneath the concern, safety for the community. Take immigration. So many of the conversations I've had with folks, they're not anti-immigrant, they're anti-crime. Yeah. And because of the rhetoric and the talk track that's going on, they've conflated the two things. Immigrants are criminals in their imagination. And so first I want to honor the good. They want a safe community. So do I. So I love that you're thinking about this. You're investing time in this. I honor you for that. I also share the value of having a safe community for me and mine and you and yours and economic security. And then there can be a time where we introduce Jesus back into the conversation because they're using dehumanizing rhetoric about immigrants, and I don't think that's in the way of Jesus. So I might say something like, I often wrestle with, how do we work towards a safe community with healthy, safe immigration policies that both maintain safety for our community and love of the foreigner, the outsider, the alien, the stranger, the immigrant, which Jesus told us to, because I often feel a tension in my heart. How do I pursue safety in the way of Jesus, which sometimes feels really dangerous? What do you think? And all I'm trying to do is reintroduce the way of Jesus to this conversation so that we can together figure out the way of truth more clearly. They have something to teach me. Maybe I've got something to teach them, but ultimately we're both trying to follow Jesus. And so reintroducing Jesus to that conversation about culture war issue is really my only goal. And actually, that's not my only goal. My other goal is I want to be like Jesus in this conversation. Yeah. My objective is not to change their mind. My objective is not to win an argument. It's to, with whatever moments that Jesus has given to me, to be like Jesus in those moments. And one of the key ways that I can make sure that my heart is in check when I go into those spaces is to pray a prayer that I hate. I absolutely hate this prayer. I don't like that I'm saying it out loud to you right now. I don't ever like praying this prayer, but this is the prayer. Before I go into that meeting or that conversation or whatever it might be, to pray, Lord, what do you want to teach me through them? What do you want to change in my heart through this conversation? And if I can't pray that prayer with integrity, it's likely that I am thinking of myself more highly than I ought to, that I'm coming in with some sort of savior complex, or I think I'm smarter and better than them, and I'm the one in the power position here, and they need to change. Instead, remembering what Grandma used to say, which is, I'm just one beggar telling another beggar where I found bread, and maybe they've got some bread for me too in this exchange. But together we can both become more like Jesus if that's where we're fixing our eyes. Yeah. And so keeping conversations moving towards the way of Jesus, I think, is the ultimate goal.
It's hard in our culture to, especially in our media culture, it's hard to even admit that, because that would imply that the other person is not a fascist, a Nazi,
right.
Whatever,
evil.
Fill in the blank. Yeah. It would imply that they are not the evil that I am constructing them to be in my mind. But you say, there's a great quote you said on page 56. You said, one of the great misunderstandings in our day is that people who believe conspiracy theories are uneducated or intellectually deficient. Mm-hmm. And you're talking, the conspiracy theory, this was like the height of QAnon and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point to make, because I have some friends who are good friends of mine. They're pretty heavy, it's pretty easy to get them to believe a conspiracy. Mm-hmm. Some for fun. It's kind of tongue in cheek. I'm just asking questions, wink, wink, But then others it's a little more serious. They're kind of ready to believe most conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
They're not dumb by any means, and they're not evil by any means. Right. They have a view of the world that lends itself to conspiracy thinking. Now, the challenge is, especially in the last year, is it's turning out that there were quite a few conspiracies that turned out to be true. Not all, certainly not all, not even most, but there have been a couple that were just like, oh yeah, Facebook actually was throttling certain content and taking out certain things. And yes, it is likely that COVID originated in a lab, and that, like these things that are coming out that are like, so all of a sudden then all the conspiracy theorists are like, oh yeah, we were right all along, you foolish, sheep that went along. So in that, now I don't think it's as easy to dismiss all conspiracy in general.
Right.
But there's, what do you do with that? What do you do with when a conspiracy, let's say a conspiracy, when it turns out to actually have been true?
Sure.
How does that not then feed into, well, all these other ones are probably true too? Like, how do you keep the balance?
That's a great question. So first I want to say that I am a man who lives in the year of our Lord 2025, and I believe a dead Jew was not only crucified and buried, but rose from the grave, conquering over Satan, sin, and death. And all who turn from their sin and turn to him will experience life and life abundant and everlasting. Doesn't that sound crazy?
It's insane when you think of it like that. You understand why atheists laugh at it.
Yeah, I get it. So what I want to, in doing that, I'm not trying to belittle, by no means trying to make light of it. I just want to notice, I believe something unbelievable. Mm-hmm. According to a modern scientific construct, that everything has to be submitted, every truth claim has to be submitted to, scientific method or something like that. I'm sure I'm being hyperbolic right now. My concern is not primarily with the belief, it's with the behavior. Mm. If your belief that you have secret knowledge leads you to hubris, arrogance, violence, or belittling, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. So if you believe that lizard people run the government, okay, I don't think that. If you think that lizard people run the government and therefore you should take up arms and gun down people that you deem worthy of execution, I've got huge problems with that. And it's not about the lizard people part.
Right.
The way that, how you're behaving is not like the fruit of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, in Phoenix, election denial is a big deal. There's a person who's run for multiple offices. That's the key thing is election denialism. Mm-hmm. I've toured the county, at the recorder's office. Steve Richer served as our, he was in charge of that for a few years. I've met with him a few times. I did some civic engagement, but I don't understand how all this stuff works. I'm not going to be an expert on it. My belief is that it's free and fair election, that it's got as much as integrity as a system of people can have. I've not seen any evidence to the contrary. And yet I'm in fellowship with people who swear up and down that the election was stolen. Okay. So now we have two different convictions, two different understandings of how our election system works. My question is, can we do John 17 still? Can we still be one as Christ is? Because I also maintain fellowship with Christians with whom I fundamentally disagree about other things. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, you believe in the election is, rigged. Okay, but love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. In my conversations with some of my friends who are more in the election denial space is like, okay, let us assume that there is super secret corruption happening, which I don't disagree could happen. That could totally happen. If I read my Bible correctly, it's that evil shapeshifts and hides itself all the time, right? I'm not seeing it, but maybe I'm not saying you're crazy, because that's definitely not outside the realm of reason. Billionaires have done evil stuff to make more money before, so who's to say they're not doing it again? I don't know. However, how can you and I practice the way of Jesus in light of a broken world? Because whether we're agreeing with the level of brokenness in this field or that field, we're all in agreement that stuff's broken. And the solution to that secret problem that only you and your friends know about is still practice the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
So Facebook's algorithms, okay, be like Jesus. I forgot what was the other one you mentioned.
Anything. I mean, I just
all
out
the things. Yeah,
I
mean, the QAnon, super conspiracy. Okay, there are people conspiring to do evil stuff, like there have been from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I will concede that willfully, because I believe it too. I just don't think it applies. We are not in agreement that it's applying here, but we do believe it does apply to the nature of this world. And so how are we going to be in this world? We're going to be like Jesus with each other.
Yeah. Have you ever met anybody, because you do spend a lot more time in these circles than most people, or than a lot of people. Have you ever met anybody that is an election denier about an election that their candidate won? Or is it always, I mean, I'm not even being tongue in cheek.
I have not yet.
I have never. To me, that's the biggest, most glaring issue is the parties have gone back and forth the last few elections. So, it's only, people only deny when their team loses. And
yeah, that's what I don't get about it. That's kind of why I think we're doing probably a pretty good job. Is everybody's upset? Yeah.
I would honestly, it'd be refreshing if somebody was like, yeah, the election was rigged, my team won. We took it. Yeah, we did. I would at least be like, all right, well,
okay, cool.
I'll listen to what you have to say a lot more than I'll listen to anybody else. But it does go back to that, that would be somebody who's willing to critique their own.
Yeah.
And that I have a greater intellectual respect for somebody who I can see is willing to critique their own. Even if I was like, okay, well, you're still bonkers, but at least you're, that'll give me pause. Yeah. I want to ask you, there's two more quotes that I want to look at before we wrap up. You said, I'll save the other one for the end, but the one that I thought had a good uncomfortableness to it was when you said on page 117, you said, a person who hates the culture of their mission field is not a missionary, but a colonizer. And usually language of colonization is language that people on the more progressive end would lob at people on the more conservative end. You are directing that, it seems, towards how people view the mission field of American Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
So what do you just unpack that one? Because that was did he really say that?
Yeah, if I want people to change so they can be more like me, that's colonization. Because I'm supremacizing myself over and above others. I make the distinction between a missionary and a colonizer and I mean missionary in a healthy way. I get that there's baggage. But a healthy missionary wants people to follow the way of Jesus in whichever way they are in the world. Like their culture, their personhood, their, all that stuff. That's part of the diversity of the church and the manifold wisdom of God being put on display, as it says in Ephesians. A colonizer says, you need to follow Jesus like me. And I felt it in my own heart. I mean, I would go to some of these places or meet with people and I would feel derision at not the fact that they were not following the way of Jesus, as I best understand it, but that they ate at Cracker Barrel and they listened to Lee Greenwood CDs. And I was just like, that's stupid. I don't like that. And that's not a them problem. That's a me problem. That's my own hubris and arrogance.
Right. Because Cracker Barrel is awesome.
Yeah. I mean,
You're talking to somebody born and raised in Georgia. Come on.
But but it's this idea of my projecting onto others my own way of being in the world, as if that is the way of being in the world.
Right. Your cultural values, not your ethical values.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I see that. I see all of us doing that. I understand. I agree with what you're saying. Usually you hear colonizing language coming, accusations coming from people who are more in a quote unquote progressive space, but we're trying to make each other in our own image.
Yeah.
And part of the beauty of the image of God in all of humanity is that it takes all of us as a giant mosaic to see the beauty of God in humanity writ large, which is why I think that the church is designed to be socioeconomically and ethnically diverse, is because you get a little glimpse of it in our different ways of being. And when we flatten it all out and just become like me, I'm concerned it just becomes another version of idolatry.
Yeah. I completely agree. We see it in our culture. What we're wrestling with is for sure is the coastal elite versus the flyover country. You know, both sides want the other to be like them because they think the other is morally bankrupt or, broken, backwards.
Yes.
And you can see like the attitudes that people in Texas have towards California. Like they look at it as, yes, that's a hellscape everybody's trying to escape from. And then you see it, people in, Manhattan looking at Kentucky and they're like, dear Lord, why would anybody want to live like those backwoods hicks? Yep. And we all do it. We're tempted to, and it's not the Lamb.
No,
it's definitely not the Lamb.
And it's not the church. I mean, it's not the way the church was meant to be.
What's your church's, I don't want to reduce it to demographics because I don't think that tells the whole picture, but what's your church's feel like? Some churches are like, suburban church. Some churches are more inner city, more rural, more urban. How would you describe the church?
We're a 48-year-old non-denominational Bible church in the suburbs of Phoenix. And so the vibe would be suburban because that's where we are. The area that we're in, though, is one of the most economically diverse areas. 3 miles to our east is Kierland, which is one of the most affluent districts in Scottsdale, which is one of the most affluent cities in the country. And then 3 miles west is Palomino, which is the more northernmost impoverished district in Phoenix. And we pull from both sides. We've spent the last since 2013, last 12 years being real intentional about making sure that we look like our community, and glad to talk more about that. But do you mean ethnically, or do you mean socioeconomically? Economically, ethnically, and geographically, just making sure that we're pulling from all those spaces politically too. Yeah. And part of the vibe, so to speak, we hit on the centered set concept of church, that we're not bounded together by common affinities, but we're centered on Jesus, which means if Jesus is the gravitational pull, there's going to be people who are completely opposite of you that are being drawn towards Jesus too. So just expect the fact that you're going to be disappointed when you're sharing communion with someone with whom you fundamentally disagree or have no idea why they behave that way. That's totally normal. So normalizing kind of the conflict and the disagreement in the church, but recognizing that there's a greater beauty waiting for us on the other side of those disagreements. And so we've really worked to do our best to make sure that no one culture has home field advantage. So all the cultures, as best as we can, we express them and celebrate and elevate. And this goes to leadership, the board, worship, all that kind of stuff, who's on the stage. We're still amateurs at it. We're still trying to figure it out, but our commitment is to be as diverse as our community that we're called to.
I don't know of any churches that have it perfect, have that aspect perfected because of the 80s and the 90s, the homogeneous growth principle.
Yes.
The scourge of evangelicalism was like, no, people should, I shouldn't say evangelicalism, because the historic Black church wrestles with this, Asian churches wrestle with this. Like, if any affinity group wrestles with it when they get the vision of like, oh, our church should be, the kingdom on earth should reflect the kingdom of heaven, and we don't. I don't know of many church. I think that's an area where all churches really struggle. Some more than others. But just being aware of it, and not in a token sense either. That you can tell sometimes when there's been gatherings where it's tokenized, or what's the word? Making somebody the exotic other, and look how inclusive we are, and you're just like, ugh, this is gross.
Yeah, it's performative diversity.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great term, performative diversity.
Oh man, her name is escaping me, but a woman said, I think it was like Global Leadership Summit, and she made this statement: it's one thing to be invited to the party, it's another thing to be invited to set the playlist. And that the difference between performative diversity and actual diversity is they get to set the playlist. Everybody gets a say in the playlist, you know, how things feel, what we're doing, our food, our music, our lingo, all that kind of stuff, which creates a lot of discomfort, which is, I think, why I'm reticent to do it, because I don't like being uncomfortable.
Right.
And yet going to the gym is uncomfortable.
Right.
But it's good for you. Or the dojo, pardon me. Going to the dojo is uncomfortable, but it's good for you.
Yes.
And I think embracing discipleship as a growth process that requires discomfort is something that we can recapture in our imagination.
Yeah, that's good, because so much of our church culture in all churches is, I want to be comfortable. I want the music to make me I love the high church and the austerity of hymns, and I think that preserves God's reverence. So all this nonsense that skinny jeans wearing worship leader, like,
this chai latte guitar going on.
And then the flip side, people are like, man, I want my hands in the air and I want to sing my heart out to Jesus, and I don't want the stuffiness and the blah. It all really just is, which of those are you more comfortable with? Because they're sold out Christians that you can find in both of those.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, let me wrap it up with it. There's a lot more that we could talk about, and I feel like we could unpack tons of things, and because I resonated so very much with what I was reading in the book. You ended by making a very important point, though, and I get when somebody asked me, I said, I'm having Caleb Campbell on to talk about, and there's another book, I don't know if you read Piercing Leviathan. As a biblical theology of Job. Yeah. So, and in my head, I just said, Piercing Leviathan. I was like, no, there we go. Yeah. It's a fantastic book.
Written by Eric Ortland,
Piercing Leviathan.
Series editor, D.A. Carson.
It's actually an excellent book, but
I love it. Yeah. It's a great book.
It was in my head. I was thinking, I corrected myself, Disarming Leviathan. And that's actually not an insignificant point, because, and Ortland's book is not at all about culture or any of that. His is a biblical theology of Job and the defeat of Leviathan in Job. So it's a perfectly apt title for what he was writing about. Yes. Yours, though, Disarming Leviathan, is an important twist on that, because, and I'll read what you say at the end, page 182. You said, "We cannot slay the great dragon of American Christian nationalism, but we can compassionately care for the souls of the people caught up in it and seek to restore them to flourishing relationship with Jesus and his church." So many of us, and I count myself in this category, unfortunately, more than I want to admit, we want to slay the dragon of Christian nationalism, because we think that that's what God is calling us to do. And you give a needed reminder, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Why was it important to you to make sure that at the end of the book you highlight that?
Yeah. The combat metaphor is so prominent now and so easily twisted to be used against people. The Apostle Paul was very articulate when he said, "We wage war not against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, rulers, and authorities." And in my understanding of Scripture, the war is in me. I'm not trying to hurt you and call you a demon or a devil or a dragon or a Leviathan. So defeating, destroying this violent rhetoric is so easily twisted to violence towards humans.
Mm-hmm.
And the disarming piece speaks also to the ultimate redemptive and restorative work of God. In one of the prophets, there's this line that seems to intimate that in the new heavens and new earth, that Leviathan will be the Lord's plaything.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly, I'm so overwhelmed with the beauty of the hope that even the things that I see as so destructive could be, by the magnificent power of God, be restored and redeemed. That I didn't want to lose that beauty, that even Leviathan is redeemed and restored in the end. And so taking on the posture of a warrior focuses my heart in a certain way. Taking on the posture of a hope-filled ambassador of a kingdom that is coming postures my heart in another way, and it's a more hope-filled way. And that is what at least for me, I know I need, is hope. And not hope in my own capacity to destroy things or disintegrate things, but rather in the hope that only comes from Jesus, that he will deliver and restore all that which is broken.
That's beautiful, man. I love it. It's so needed in this age of doom scrolling, because it is hard.
Right, I know.
Hard to keep hope. Every day I wake up like, what's going to be the thing that's lighting up social media today?
Why am I angry already?
It's it's wave after wave. The newest one as of today is constitutional crisis. Like you hear that phrase over and over. And then it'll be something else the next day. It'll be something else the next day. And without that hope, that's the Christian nationalist movement is inherently built on fear.
That's right.
And it's not a movement, because people that are filled with hope don't buy into the fear mongering that Christian nationalist leaders rely on.
Yes.
And man, I think what you're doing is incredible. And I hope that more Christians read this. I hope Christian nationalists read it. I don't think they will. I think most won't. But I'm hoping that some thoughtful people who are swayed by Turning Point USA memes or the mailing list that tells them this is how you should vote in your upcoming election and gives them the names, or, I'm hoping that some of them who are thoughtful, even if they're pulled in that direction naturally, will go, okay, let me at least see what this guy's talking about. And then maybe some seeds are planted,
Yeah.
They may not change. They may
good.
not. And you are not advocate. Well, I didn't find anywhere in here where you ever told people this is how you should vote. This is the party you should support. This is how, it was just the only thing you did tell people that they should do was emulate, follow, and worship Jesus.
Yep.
Which we should all be, that's at least the common ground. Like you said, the center of gravity.
For sure. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I love the book, man. I wholeheartedly, Disciple Dojo definitely recommends Disarming Leviathan. So if you viewers are out there watching, check it out. Caleb, what's the best way if folks want to learn more about you, your church, if they want to connect with, maybe have you come speak, or maybe just they have questions. Maybe they're watching this and they're like, wait a minute, what did you mean by, how can interested people get in touch with you?
Yep. So probably the easiest way is disarmingleviathan.com. And there is a contact page there that'll go to me. Perfect. So I'd love to hear from you. Perfect. And then I'm on most of the socials, Disarming Leviathan or some version of it will usually get you there.
Okay.
Those are great ways to connect with me.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then what's the name of your church again for folks that may be visiting Phoenix?
Yeah. Desert Springs Bible Church.
Desert Springs Bible Church.
Yeah.
Yep. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you have just a unsettledness, or do you think like, I'm ready to tap out?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Always want to make sure, because I have things that I wanted to cover, but
I love that you quoted my book back to me. That's always a surreal experience. Like, did I say that? That's great. I'm glad I said that.
Yeah, right. You're like, oh, people have done that before for me. I'm like,
all right,
I said that.
That's
yeah.
cool.
Well, it also keeps me honest because people know that I actually read the books when I have somebody on.
Yeah, good.
A lot of talk show hosts don't do that, and
yeah, that's right.
And you can tell when they don't either. So, but I did. I did it. I read it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually bought it. This was not sent to me, guys. I don't have to put paid endorsement in this episode because IVP did not send me this copy. But yes, it is. I do endorse it. This is not a paid endorsement. This is just an endorsement. Check out the book, read it, and even if you end up not agreeing with everything that Caleb says in it, that's okay.
Yep.
Send him a message on his website. Tell him why. I'm sure he won't mind. No, but I really do thank you for coming on and spending a little bit of time here in the dojo.
Yeah.
And you're welcome back anytime, and keep me posted on what's happening because this channel seeks to be a bridge and to highlight things going on within Christendom that I think are worth knowing about, and I think your work is one of those. So
that's very good, generous. Thank you.
So I want to once again thank Caleb for coming in. I really do. I mean, I give a ringing endorsement to this book. I think it's excellent. I think it's needed. That's the biggest thing. I think books like this are rare in our current socio-political climate, but they shouldn't be. They should be the norm, not the exception. Unfortunately, they're the exception. So I hope you read Caleb's book. I hope you check it out. And again, if you don't agree with everything in it, that's okay. That's part and parcel of expanding our horizons and interacting with people from whatever perspective they're coming from that may be different from ours. So thanks for watching. If you appreciate this episode or any of our other dojo discussions here on the channel, we'd love for you to, if you haven't already, tap the subscribe button. And when you do, enable notifications. Just that literally takes 2 seconds to do, but it is incredibly helpful to us as a ministry, to this channel here on YouTube. But that'll do it for now. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more here at Disciple Dojo. And in the meantime, keep training.